Our success stems from removing the unproductive elements that hindered our progress, Hunter proclaimed from the podium, his voice resonating throughout the grand ballroom. The audience broke into loud applause as camera flashes illuminated his face. I remained motionless at table 12, seeing our company's most important launch event turn into my own public humiliation. The sheer irony of the situation was palpable. For 14 years, I had ensured this company was both profitable and legally sound, only to be labeled as expendable. My name is Grace Reyes, and I am 52 years old. I've spent more than a decade as the Chief Financial Officer for Viridian Machining Solutions, a medium-sized manufacturing firm headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. While my colleagues pursued public recognition and accolades, my work was done out of the spotlight. I made certain our financial records were immaculate, our business alliances were strong, and our adherence to regulations was perfect. I wasn't one for dazzling slideshows or charming potential clients at industry mixers. I was the one who guaranteed the math was correct, and the contracts were airtight. Evidently, however, that work meant little to Hunter Warren, the new CEO who arrived 6 months prior, with grand promises of innovation and expansion. From his very first day, he signaled that my careful, systematic way of doing things didn't fit his concept of a vibrant, progressive company. He was looking for people who would blindly approve his ambitious growth strategies, not someone who would raise difficult questions about unrealistic forecasts and dubious supplier deals. While I observed Hunter soaking up the adoration and calling our newest product line groundbreaking, my mind was on the uncertified audit report, locked away in my office safe. It was the report that outlined financial inconsistencies I had found just the week before, the report I declined to approve until we rectified the problems. Hunter had dismissed my worries, claiming we could sort out the specifics down the road, but my experience told me otherwise. He insisted we could fix the issues later, but I knew that wasn't true. I had dedicated my entire career to establishing a name for myself, built on integrity, and I had no intention of sacrificing it now. The crowd was captivated by Hunter's every word, as he described a future of unparalleled achievement and boundless possibilities. Investors nodded in agreement, their eagerness to write checks almost tangible. I spotted a few board members dispersed among the attendees, each one smiling with contentment. They were completely unaware of the real situation unfolding behind closed doors. Security personnel started making their way through the tables, their target clear. I had been anticipating this ever since Hunter summoned me to his office that morning to inform me, with his typical smirk, "Your services are no longer needed, Grace. We're pursuing a new direction," he'd said. He orchestrated my firing flawlessly, scheduling it just ahead of our most important event to guarantee I'd be thoroughly humiliated. Yet, as the guards neared my table, I rose to my feet with composure and took hold of the black folder I had ready. A strong feeling told me this night would not go according to Hunter's script. In hindsight, the warning signs were there months ago. Hunter Warren's arrival at Viridian Machining Solutions was met with considerable excitement. Our board recruited him following our former CEO's retirement announcement. Business journals praised him as a visionary who had elevated his last company from a local business to a national force. What those articles conveniently omitted was his departure from that company just prior to a federal probe into its accounting practices. I had, naturally, looked into his background. Thoroughness was part of my job. When I presented my findings to the board, they waved them off as the usual pushback against new leadership. Hunter possesses the exact innovative mindset we require, Sterling Carmichael, the board chairman, told me at our quarterly review. Sometimes, achieving exceptional outcomes demands that you take measured risks. Those measured risks began almost right away. Hunter started advocating for aggressive revenue goals that felt completely detached from our actual capabilities. He aimed to enter new markets without adequate research, approve deals with suppliers I hadn't properly screened, and form alliances that set off all my internal compliance alarms. Each time I voiced a concern, he would offer that patronizing smile and suggest I was being overly careful. The final straw came 3 weeks back. During our regular executive meeting, Hunter put forth a plan to backdate a number of supplier contracts to artificially boost our quarterly figures. A hush fell over the room as he detailed his scheme, and eventually every gaze fell upon me. I met his eyes directly and stated, "I cannot and will not approve any document that falsifies our financial standing." For a brief instant, his composed facade cracked, exposing the chilly opportunism under his polished surface. "Grace, I hear your concerns, but at times we must be creative with how we report. It's a common practice in this business." "No, Hunter, it is not," I answered with resolve. "And even if it was, it would still be illegal." The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Other executives fidgeted in their chairs, visibly caught between siding with their new leader and the person who had protected the company from legal issues for more than 10 years. Ultimately, the majority stayed quiet, which showed me precisely where their allegiances were. I went home that evening and started to record everything, each dubious choice, every improper demand, and all the shortcuts Hunter had pressured me to take. I took pictures of emails, made copies of files, and built a detailed log of his efforts to falsify our financial reports. You could call it professional caution or just common sense, but I discovered long ago that when your principles are on the line, solid documentation is your strongest shield. My assistant, Clara, had picked up on my late hours and weekend work. "Is everything all right, Grace?" she inquired last Friday, while I secured another batch of files in my office safe. Clara had been at the company for 8 years and knew me well enough to sense when something was deeply amiss. "Just taking extra precautions," I replied, a statement that was both accurate and a significant downplaying of the situation. The discovery that would alter the course of events emerged the week prior to the launch, concealed within a standard audit report that should have been simple. While going over our third-quarter finances, I saw inconsistencies in multiple major accounts, revenue figures that didn't align with our real sales data, expenses that were strangely recategorized, and payments to suppliers for contracts I had no record of. I dedicated the whole weekend to my office, comparing documents and tracing the evidence. My findings sent a chill down my spine. Hunter wasn't just encouraging risky accounting, he was deliberately faking our records. Revenue was inflated by almost 15%, using a mix of backdated agreements and imaginary sales. Expenses were altered to give the impression of better profit margins. Even the cash flow reports had been tampered with. The auditing firm we had used for years, Bellwether and Stone, had already started its initial assessment. I knew the senior partner, Elias Bellwether, on a professional level, and had faith in his ethics. When I phoned him on Sunday night to review what I'd found, his tone became serious. "Grace, these figures don't correspond with the data we were given," he stated, after I explained my findings. "If what you are saying is correct, this looks like methodical fraud." "That is precisely what it is," I responded. "The real question is how we should proceed." Elias was silent for a considerable pause. "We must stop the audit right away until these issues are cleared up. I cannot approve financial statements that I know are falsified." On Monday morning, I asked for an urgent meeting with Hunter. I entered his office holding a copy of the initial audit results and my personal records of the discrepancies. His response wasn't what I anticipated. Rather than refuting the claims or getting angry, Hunter simply leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Grace, you're making this far more complex than necessary. These are just alternative methods for showing the same data. Nothing we are doing is technically against the law." "Hunter, this is fraud," I said, setting the papers down on his desk. "We cannot show these figures to our investors or the board. I will not sign them." His smile remained fixed. "Then maybe it's time we had a talk about your future here." The implication was unmistakable, but I did not back down. "Are you telling me to approve fraudulent financial reports?" "I'm telling you to be a part of the team." I got to my feet and collected my papers. "In that case, I suppose we have an issue." That exchange determined my fate, but it also hardened my determination. Hunter could dismiss me, shame me, and even ruin my name, but he couldn't make me sacrifice my principles. As I readied myself for what I knew was my last week at Viridian Machining Solutions, I ensured every bit of proof was meticulously saved and arranged. If Hunter wanted a fight, I was prepared. The launch event would be the ideal setting for the truth to be revealed. The night of the launch arrived with all the ceremony and flair Hunter had imagined. The main hall of the Azure Grand Hotel was adorned in Viridian's company colors, while waiters moved through the crowd with fine wine and hors d'oeuvres. Reporters from trade publications mixed with possible investors, board members, and important clients. It was precisely the type of high-stakes event where Hunter excelled. I made my entrance fashionably late, dressed in my finest black suit, and holding the folder that was about to change the course of the evening. Clara had volunteered to come along for support, but I turned her down. This was a task I had to handle by myself. Upon entering the hall, I saw Hunter near the stage, encircled by admirers and commanding attention like the natural performer he was. The presentation started promptly at 7 p.m. Hunter walked onto the stage with polished self-assurance, his smile radiant enough to light up the whole building. He talked with fervor about innovation, disrupting the market, and Viridian's brilliant future. The crowd was spellbound, absorbing every word as he described a vision of unmatched growth and financial success. "Our third-quarter performance surpassed all projections," he announced, motioning to the large screen, showing our supposedly fantastic financial results. "Revenue has increased 18% from last year, and our profit margins have grown substantially due to smart operational enhancements." My stomach clenched as I saw him deliver the fabricated figures with such certainty. A number of investors in the room nodded their heads, visibly impressed by what they thought was exceptional financial stability. The board chairman, Sterling Carmichael, smiled broadly from his seat in the front row, clearly delighted with his CEO selection. Hunter went on with his speech, detailing grand expansion projects and growth forecasts that were completely reliant on the fraudulent financial base he had built. "We aren't simply expanding," he declared. "We are transforming how this business defines efficiency and profitability." Then, the moment I had been both dreading and awaiting arrived. Hunter's face became solemn as he got ready to talk about what he termed essential organizational shifts. "Success demands hard choices," he started, his voice adopting a graver quality. "To get the results you see before you, we were forced to cut out inefficiencies and clear away barriers to our advancement. At times, this involves letting go of staff who oppose change or can't adjust to new ways of working." The attendees paid close attention, evidently accepting his story of firm but vital leadership. I could see a few investors nodding in agreement, buying the idea that prosperous companies must sometimes make difficult staffing decisions. "Our success stems from removing the unproductive elements that hindered our progress," Hunter declared, his smile reappearing with renewed vigor. A wave of enthusiastic applause swept through the room, and I could feel the stare of everyone present. Some of them knew exactly who he meant, and their eyes felt like they were boring into me. Security personnel started making their way through the tables, their target clearly my own. Hunter had planned this moment to perfection, a public shaming followed by an escort out, all before the very people whose views held the most weight in our field. It was a textbook example of destroying someone's reputation. However, as the guards drew near, I rose calmly and started moving towards the stage. The attendees quieted down, realizing something unusual was about to happen. Hunter's smile wavered for a second when he saw me, but he quickly regained his composure, likely thinking I was going to make a frantic appeal or have an emotional breakdown. I ascended the stairs to the stage with deliberate poise, the black folder held tightly in my hands. The entire ballroom was now silent, with hundreds of pairs of eyes fixated on the developing scene. Hunter kept his confident air, offering his hand as if to bid me a polite goodbye. I bypassed his handshake and gave him the folder instead. "Congratulations on your success," I stated plainly, my voice audible in the hushed room. My delivery was perfectly pleasant, almost friendly, which seemed to surprise him. With nothing more to say, I turned, descended from the stage, moved through the onlookers, and left the ballroom. In my wake, I could hear the low hum of puzzled chatter as Hunter opened the folder that would bring down his entire charade. That folder held it all, 14 pages of painstakingly compiled proof that would dismantle Hunter's elaborate network of lies. Driving home through the streets of Raleigh, I pictured him lifting that black cover and laying eyes on the first page, a letter from Bellwether and Stone declaring their refusal to approve our financial statements until significant discrepancies in revenue and expense reporting were resolved. The next part included printouts of the real sales records, placed next to the altered versions Hunter had presented for the quarterly updates. The side-by-side view made the inflated numbers undeniable. Revenue had been artificially inflated via backdated deals with suppliers, who had confirmed in writing they never consented to the reported terms. Page 7 laid out the reclassification of expenses used to create the appearance of higher profit margins. Valid operating expenses had been shifted into other accounts or removed completely to fabricate an image of improved efficiency. Each change was marked and cross-checked with the source documents. The most damning evidence was near the end. Printed emails, Hunter's own words, telling the accounting team to find creative solutions for revenue gaps and ordering department managers to think outside the box on expense reporting. His electronic footprint of coercion and bullying, saved in black and white. The last pages held statements from 3 major suppliers who had been approached by Hunter's staff about backdating their contracts. All 3 had declined and supplied written evidence of the requests. One had even noted they were thinking about terminating their partnership with Viridian because of what they saw as dishonest business dealings. By the time I got to my suburban home, my phone was already buzzing. Clara's name flashed on the screen, but I ignored the call. Then Sterling Carmichael called, and after him, 2 board members I knew. I let each call go to voicemail as I poured a glass of wine and sat down in my living room, at last letting myself absorb the gravity of the evening's events. The local evening news was already featuring a segment on the turmoil at a prominent Raleigh manufacturing firm's product launch. They lacked specifics, but noted that several important investors departed suddenly after an unforeseen disruption during the event. One journalist cited sources who described an apparent exchange of documents that led to clear agitation among those present. My phone vibrated with a text from Elias Bellwether. "Saw the news. Are you okay?" I sent a simple response. Yes, the right thing was done. Clara called once more, and this time I picked up. "Grace, what happened? It was chaos here after you were gone. Hunter looked like he saw a ghost, and then the investors started walking out in droves. Is everything all right?" "Everything is precisely as it ought to be," I said to her. Hunter finally had a look at the actual financial state of the company, not the fantasy he's been selling. "What are you talking about?" "Clara, you should probably begin searching for a new job. Viridian is about to encounter some major difficulties in the next few weeks." The line went quiet as she absorbed my words. Clara was sharp enough to understand the implications. "Grace, what did that folder contain?" "The truth," I said plainly. just the truth. After ending the call, I let myself feel a brief sense of accomplishment. For months, I observed Hunter doctoring numbers, bullying employees, and erecting his success upon a base of falsehoods. Tonight, that base had collapsed before the very audience he was desperate to win over. The applause for his speech about trimming useless staff would be his final moment of triumph at Viridian Machining Solutions. Wednesday morning delivered the initial repercussions. I awoke to 17 missed calls and 43 texts. The Raleigh Commerce Chronicle had managed to get information about the launch and ran a story headlined, "Financial Concerns. Shake Viridian Machining Solutions after executives exit." Though they were cautious with their wording, the message was unmistakable. Something had gone terribly wrong. Before 10 a.m., 3 key investors had officially demanded emergency meetings with the board. 2 more sent letters stating they would be reassessing their investment, pending an explanation of the latest financial reports. The chain reaction I had foreseen was now well underway. Clara called just before noon, her voice strained with worry. "Grace, it's mayhem at the office. Hunter held a company-wide meeting this morning, but he looked awful. He insisted everything was fine, but no one bought it. Then Elias Bellwether arrived with 2 other auditors, and they've been in the main conference room with Hunter and Sterling Carmichael for hours. How is the morale there?" I asked, truly worried about my former co-workers. Everyone is terrified. There are whispers of layoffs, of the company facing financial ruin. A lot of people are saying you were right about Hunter all along, that he was manipulating the financials. The vindication felt empty. Being right about Hunter's deceit brought me no pleasure when it could mean trouble for blameless employees who were just doing their work. These were individuals I had worked with for years, experts who were owed more than having their livelihoods upended by one person's avarice and ego. On Thursday, the news broke that Hunter had been put on administrative leave while a full audit was conducted. The information was released in a curt statement that mentioned ongoing financial reviews and the necessity for total transparency during the process. It was easy to see the board was preparing to sever its relationship with Hunter completely. Friday afternoon brought a surprise call from Liam Kendrick, the CEO of North Star Precision Works, one of Viridian's main rivals. I knew Liam from various industry functions over the years and held his reputation for principled leadership in high regard. "Grace, I heard about what's happening at Viridian," he began, getting straight to the point. "I also heard you were the person who brought it all to light. News certainly gets around quickly in this business," I responded cautiously. "It does, when an act of genuine courage is involved. Look, I realize the timing might not be ideal, but I want to talk to you about a position. We need a new head for our financial division, someone with unimpeachable integrity and extensive industry knowledge." The proposition took me by surprise. I had been so concentrated on doing what was right at Viridian that I hadn't considered the next step in my own career path. The thought of moving to a competitor, particularly one with North Star's outstanding reputation, was compelling. "I'm grateful for the offer, Liam, but I think it's best if I wait for the dust to settle before I make any big moves. I understand completely, but Grace, your actions took true courage. The entire industry is discussing it. Many people admire what you did." After we hung up, it dawned on me that my professional standing, which I feared might be tarnished by the clash with Hunter, was in fact growing stronger. The business world was viewing my actions not as a betrayal of my company, but as a demonstration of professional ethics. Other leaders were seeing the events at Viridian as a warning about the critical need for moral leadership. The next week promised even more significant events. For the time being, however, I let myself feel a sense of guarded optimism about the direct results of my choices and the future prospects for my career. The decisive blow landed exactly 1 week after the launch, arriving with the icy efficiency of a federal inquiry. I was sipping coffee at my kitchen table when Clara called, delivering news that would permanently derail Hunter's career. "Grace, the FBI is here," she whispered into her phone. "They showed up about an hour ago with warrants. They're taking computers, documents, everything." Hunter was taken into custody at his home this morning. Even I was surprised by how quickly the investigation moved. It turned out that one of the investors who walked out of the launch had connections at the Securities and Exchange Commission. The folder I gave Hunter did more than just expose him to the board and investors. It set off a federal probe into securities fraud. "What's happening with the staff?" I asked, my worry for my former team members eclipsing any sense of vindication over Hunter's arrest. "Most employees are being sent home while the agents work. HR is telling us the company will remain operational, but truthfully, no one has any idea what will happen next." The afternoon news broadcast confirmed Claire's account and added more details. Hunter was facing charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to falsify financial records. These charges could lead to a prison sentence of up to 20 years. Viridian's stock, which had reached all-time highs only days before, was now halted from trading pending the outcome of the investigation. By nightfall, the story was on national business channels. A major network ran a feature on corporate crime in mid-sized manufacturing, using Viridian as an example of how fast fraudulent accounting can fall apart. The segment mentioned that the probe was initiated by whistleblower proof from a former executive with deep knowledge of the company's finances. Sterling Carmichael stepped down from the board that same day, as did 2 other directors who were key in bringing Hunter on board. The remaining directors named an acting CEO and declared they would cooperate completely with the federal probe. They also released a public notice admitting that significant financial improprieties had been found and vowing full transparency moving forward. The irony was not lost on me. Hunter had painted me as a useless employee who was a drag on the company. In truth, I was the only person who stood between Viridian and total ruin. My refusal to sign off on false financial reports had not only protected my own principles, but had also shielded the company from much worse legal consequences. 3 months later, I found myself in the executive conference room at North Star Precision Works, going over quarterly reports as their new chief financial officer. Liam Kendrick had followed up on his offer once things settled down at Viridian, and I accepted, impressed by his dedication to ethical leadership and transparent business practices. The move was incredibly seamless. North Star's financial procedures were precisely what I had been hoping for, perfectly kept, completely compliant, and wonderfully direct. After years of battling Hunter's efforts to fudge the numbers, dealing with honest books was a welcome change. I hadn't known I was missing. Viridian made it through, but just barely. The acting CEO stabilized the company with aggressive budget cuts and a total revamp of their financial reporting. They also brought in Bellwether and Stone to perform a full audit and establish new control measures. Clara remained with the core team, contributing to the effort to restore the company's good name and operations. Hunter's trial was set for the next year, though his defense lawyers had already signaled they would pursue a plea bargain. Industry experts calculated that his fraudulent activities had cost investors more than $12 million through inflated company values and misleading projections. Several civil suits were initiated by pension funds and private investors who acted on the basis of the false financial information. The incident became a major discussion point in our field regarding the necessity of financial governance and the bravery it takes to challenge authority. I received invitations to speak at 3 different conferences on corporate ethics and leadership, but I turned them all down. I preferred to have my work speak for itself. As I examined North Star's flawless financial data, I thought about how much my life had transformed since that evening at the Azure Grand Hotel. Sometimes, doing what is right comes at a price, but other times, It opens doors to opportunities greater than anything one could have foreseen. My phone buzzed with a text from Elias Bellwether. Saw the North Star announcement. Congratulations on the new role. The industry is fortunate to have someone with your principles in a leadership position. Reflecting on the journey that led me here, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction in the knowledge that occasionally justice and career success can line up perfectly.